Everyone, welcome to our program today. I'm Sarah Maduri with Repatriate the Children USA, and I'm delighted to be hosting today's program. Repatriate the Children is a children's rights organization existing to raise awareness of children being detained in Northeast Syria and to contribute to knowledge-based decision-making where humanitarian principles, rule of law, and global security are united. RTC operates with 3 autonomous national branches, Denmark, US, and Sweden, and has been an integral actor in the first instances of countries repatriating their citizens from the camps in Northeast Syria. RTC advocates for the children languishing in these camps, supports the families awaiting their return, and collaborates with the international community to bring these children home. It is my great privilege and delight to introduce you to the people we'll hear from today. I'll start with Beatrice Eriksson. Beatrice is co-founder and spokesperson for Repatriate the Children. She is a social worker and has a Master of Arts degree in theology from Uppsala University with religion and peace and conflict as her main field of study. For the past 12 years, she has been working in social work and humanitarian issues in Sweden, Lebanon, and Iraq. In 2019, she worked with Patricio Galvez and Gorky Glasser-Mueller on the repatriation process to Sweden for 7 orphan siblings from Al-Hal camp in northeastern Syria. She is the author of RTC's latest report and recommendations entitled Reception of Returnees, Reintegration and Rehabilitation After Repatriation. We also have with us today Joe Becker. Joe is the Advocacy Director of the Children's Rights Division of Human Rights Watch. She has conducted research and advocacy on issues of children in armed conflict for more than 20 years, including the recruitment and use of child soldiers and the detention of children for alleged association with armed groups. Her 2022 report, My Son is Just Another Kid, examines the reintegration of children returned from Northeast Syria to their home countries. Welcome, Joe. Additionally, Bridget Kennedy Feaster also joins us today. Since January 2019, Bridget has been a senior child protection specialist for UNICEF New York as the global lead for UNICEF's Children in Armed Conflict programming. From 2015 to 2018, she served as chief of child protection for UNICEF in Iraq, and from 2012 to 2015 was a judicial affairs officer for the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. As a lawyer in the United States, she represented children in care and protection and special education proceedings and appeals. She has an LLM from Harvard Law School and a JD from Northeastern University School of Law. Welcome, Bridget. An increasing number of Western countries are finally starting to heed the call to repatriate thousands of their citizens who have been detained in Northeast Syria since the fall of ISIS's so-called caliphate in early 2019. Held in the squalid Al-Hal and Raj camps for alleged affiliation with ISIS, these citizens from 57 countries, most of them women and children, have been in the custody of the Kurdish-led autonomous administration of North and East Syria. The 2 camps hold an astounding total of about 60,000 people, including the majority from Syria and Iraq. The Kurdish administration has appealed repeatedly to the international community to repatriate the approximately 10,000 third country nationals, but the leaders of many of those countries have lacked the political will to live up to their legal and humanitarian responsibilities. The result is what human rights advocates and lawyers have called a new Guantanamo on the Euphrates. In just the past couple of months, however, several governments have followed the lead of countries such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Germany, and Denmark. Have followed the lead of countries such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Germany, and Denmark, and also have begun to take responsibility for their citizens in Northeast Syria. France, Australia, and the Netherlands have repatriated some of their citizens. Upon return, individuals suspected of crimes will be handled by the judicial systems, while others must be reintegrated into their societies and rehabilitated. Little research is available on the best practices for accomplishing these goals, but lessons can be gleaned from practices that have already worked well and those that haven't across receiving countries. So Beatrice, I want to start with you. I just read what was the backdrop written into your latest report on the reception and integration of returnees. You've been closely following the cases of the children repatriated to Sweden. So firstly, I want to ask, how are these kids doing today?
The children are recovering and they're adapting into their new lives here in Sweden in the most incredible way. I'm astonished actually to follow their developments. I have previously visited the prison camps in Northeast Syria, and I've seen what a humanitarian disaster these children have grown up in. So to see the children here in Sweden, you know, running around, playing, laughing in safe environments, it's truly amazing. After they arrived to Sweden, after some time separate from each other, most of the repatriated children are now reunited with their mothers. And this is something that seems to have helped the children to stabilize and recover. And they have now gotten a chance to get to know their grandparents, their aunts, their cousins, and so on. The Swedish children back here now, they have started preschool, and some of them are in school already. They have made friends, they have hobbies. I just returned home last night, actually, from traveling around in Sweden a few days, visiting some of the families, and I just wish that I could show them for the world to see. If you would meet with any of them at the playground or in their schoolyard, you would never think these are the children from the prison camps, those that the governments have been so reluctant to bring home. For example, one little girl that I met this week, and she's very much into K-pop music, and she dances to the music videos on TV, and she performed for us. A couple of other children, they were so proud to show me where they go to school, and they talked about their favorite subjects in school, their teachers. And one of them, she showed me a medal. She had won a skiing competition in school, and she concluded to me, "Life is good now." Of course, all the children have their individual situations and their individual needs. But I would say that these children, they are very curious. They want to explore, they want to learn. It was as one relative of a child put it, he said, "It's like the children are trying to make up for everything they have missed in their childhood, and now they have been given a new chance in life, and they are really making the best out of it."
So Beatrice, your latest report on the reception and reintegration of those families was recently released with remarkable insights. Tell us about the immediate reception of the returning families in Sweden.
Okay, then perhaps I should begin with a bit of background on the Swedish case specifically. It's been in 5 instances between September 2021 and May 2022. The Swedish government brought home 12 women and 23 children from Northeast Syria camps. And these families had previously lived in ISIS-controlled territory. At the time when Swedes were traveling from Sweden to Syria and Iraq, Sweden had neither specific laws in place to prevent people from making such journeys, nor laws to automatically prosecute those who came back. It was not illegal to join or to be affiliated with a designated terrorist group at that time, though of course it was illegal to commit war crimes, terrorist crimes, for example. But with these 12 women that Sweden brought home from the camps between 2021 and 2022, and none of them are currently suspected of any crime. They have been investigated, but they're not suspected. However, the investigations can recommence if new evidence would emerge because the relevant criminal classifications have no statute of limitations. So that's a bit of background on the Swedish case. So when the families arrived back in Sweden, they were met by multiple authorities, and children and mothers were immediately separated from each other at the airport as the police arrested the mothers for questioning. Meanwhile, the children were taken into the care of child protection unit at social services under a law that allows the temporary removal of child custody from the parents. And in most cases, these family separations led to dramatic scenes of children screaming and crying as they were separated from their mothers the moment they landed on Swedish ground. One child, he expressed fear that his mother would never find him again. Another child, he got so anxious, he screamed and cried until he threw up from anxiety from being separated from his mom. The mothers, they were only detained for 24 to 48 hours before they were released, though in all but one case, they remained separated from their children for weeks or months. In few cases, the children are actually still separated from their mother, even though the mothers are not suspected of crimes and they distance themselves from violent ideologies. And the reason for this very varying treatment of families from social services agencies is due to individual handling at the municipal level, because all families that come back belong to different municipalities. They have confidentiality laws between them, and every municipality is responsible for their own reception of returning families. These 23 children, they are ranging in age from 3 to 10, and they responded to the separations from their mothers with symptoms of anxiety and depression. There are several examples documented in case records describing a range of individuals involved: temporary foster parents, medical doctors, child psychiatrists, psychotherapists, children's legal representatives. All these different individuals and functions in the children's lives have been opposing separations because of these symptoms. In one case, where a child had been separated from his mother for several weeks, the child's medical records describe how the child was sitting at the front door at the foster family's house, waiting for his mother to come and pick him up. Several times, he also ran away from the foster family, and as he was found, this little 5-year-old, he described he was running to search for his mother. In this case, the evaluating doctor recommended that contact with the mother should be reestablished as soon as possible for the sake of the well-being of the child. And in another child's medical record signed by a specialized child psychologist and a licensed psychotherapist, the statement says that the child exhibited several serious psychiatric symptoms during the months that the child was separated from his mother. However, when the child was reunited with his mother, the evaluating professionals noted that the child's well-being gradually improved and stabilized. So a lesson learned for receiving authorities is that when children arrive home in their country, everything is new. Everything is new to them. It becomes like a crisis-like experience because the children are thrust into a new reality. These are children that has grown up in tented camps in the middle of the deserts. When they come back, it's the first time they're sitting in a vehicle. It's the first time they drink water from the tap. It's the first time they meet this world that we are used to. And there is much research on the psychosocial consequences for serious events and on the severe risks such occurrences pose for psychological recovery. And a basic principle in modern crisis support and psychological first aid is to keep groups and keep families together to avoid new separations. Because if a child is separated from a caregiver and source of safety, not only a caregiver, in these cases, their mothers have been their only caregiver and source of safety for the past 3 to 5 years. There is an increased risk of reinforcing the child's trauma and spurring more anxiety and insecurity. Obviously, if the child would be at risk staying with the mother, of course, the child needs to be protected. But unless remaining with the mother is a true risk to a child, we've seen that reunification has shown to be a critical step for successful reintegration into society. So I think what we have seen is that the perspective of the best interest of the child is paramount and must guide all decisions regarding children. And there must also be a do no harm perspective, where interventions from receiving authorities must aim to reduce suffering, not add to it, and instead create conditions to be able to observe the interaction between the child and mother, to see the child's well-being, to see the child's needs and how the mother can respond to the child's needs. With the Swedish cases, encouragingly, the children's separation anxiety seems to ease as time passes. As one mother, she told me, when we just had been reunited after months apart, I could not leave my child even for short moments without her expressing fear that I would never return. Now she has started school and I can also leave her with my mother and it's going well. So experiences from the Swedish case shows that reintegration and rehabilitation have a higher likelihood of success when the repatriated individuals and their families are included in the planning, and such involvement keeps families together, it avoids new separations, and it promotes a favorable psychological recovery.
It's such an interesting report. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about some of your findings as we go through the webinar. And Joe, I want to pull you into the conversation now. You've also recently released a report on the children and families like these in a number of other countries, examining the experience of over 100 children brought back to their country of nationality. Your report, like Beatrice's, inspires hope with some remarkable findings. Tell us a little about that.
Sure, thanks, Sarah. So Human Rights Watch has been concerned about the conditions of detention for these tens of thousands of foreign nationals in the camps and prisons in Northeast Syria for quite some time. And we've been really disappointed with the pace of repatriations and the fact that many governments continue to be really nervous about bringing home their nationals, even children, on national security grounds. We know that, over the last 3 years, only 1,600 children have been returned. So Human Rights Watch decided to do some research that's a bit different for us. Typically, we are documenting human rights abuses in various countries. But in this case, we decided to look at the experiences of children who have already been returned to their country of origin to see how they're doing now and to see whether these governments' fears were well-founded or not. So I'm going to do a bit of screen share to show a few slides. So we can see that, there are many countries that have detained many or even most of their nationals. So Sweden, for example, Denmark, Finland, we've mentioned Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, but we do see this reluctance. So, we decided to collect as much information as we could about children who've been repatriated. We did this by conducting interviews with family members of returned children. We spoke with lawyers, psychologists, social workers, legal guardians, case managers. And then we also did online surveys to gather information confidentially that way as well. So we gathered information on 100 children from 7 different countries. So these are children who were returned over the last 3 years to France, Germany, Kazakhstan, the Netherlands, Sweden, the UK, and Uzbekistan. And similar to what Bea described in Sweden, what we found is that given what these children have been through, it's really encouraging how many of them are reintegrating remarkably well. So, for example, we heard about children who are doing well in school, some of them even at the top of their class, children who are making friends, they're enjoying sleepovers, they're going to the zoo, to the circus, they're playing with scooters and playing football, playing with Lego. And as Bea has described, many of their family members described how excited they are to learn, how thrilled they are to go to school, and how quickly many of them are catching up with their peers. I want to relay just a few examples. So a mother in Kazakhstan, for example, told us about her son, Ibrahim, who loves math, who rides a scooter and likes to learn poems by heart. She described him as open, joyful, and confident. Yunus is the grandson of a woman in France who told us that he was fascinated with dinosaurs, he loves to play with Legos, and wants to be a veterinarian when he grows up. And Sarah is in Sweden. We talked with her grandfather, who told us about how she loves to draw and create things with her hands, and how all of his grandchildren who are orphaned when their parents were killed in Syria have really reintegrated remarkably well. He said it's possible, fully possible, for reintegration and recovery of children. My grandchildren are evidence of this. So our online survey was with 75 family members, teachers, and social workers. And I need to emphasize that this is not a random sample or a scientific survey. It's more anecdotal. But it's also very encouraging when we ask these respondents overall how the child was adjusting to life in their new country of residence. You can see that 89% of them said very well or quite well, and only 4% said that the child was having difficulties. Similarly, when we asked how they're doing in school, 73% said they were doing very well or quite well. One aunt of a girl in the UK said, in Syria, she had zero access to education. So it's remarkable how she excels now. She's learning so fast, her teachers love her. Now, 7% were having difficulties, and I just want to note that this tended to be older children who had missed out on more years of education, and so were having a harder time catching up with their peers. And this reinforces an important point that the sooner we repatriate the children, the easier it is for them to reintegrate. And then just finally, we also asked about the child's emotional and psychological well-being overall. And here again, we were encouraged to see that 82% of respondents said that the child was doing very good or quite good. 6% said that the child was having difficulties. And that's not surprising. These children have been through a lot. They have been displaced. They have often lost a family member or more. They have witnessed and experienced violence, missed out on education. A lot of the mental health officials that we talked to emphasize that this is actually true of many children who have come from war contexts, including refugee children. So it's not surprising that they would need some extra help to adjust. But, even some of the children having difficulties, their family members said that it was remarkable, given what they've been through, how well they are doing. And one of the points that we've also made is that many of the countries that have been dragging their feet on repatriating their nationals, including children, have at the same time helped reintegrate thousands of refugee children from conflict areas around the world, and have done that quite successfully, and actually have the resources that they need to help these children as well. So why don't I pause there? Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And, when the first time I read the report, I was really amazed at the gains the children have made, as your report, mentions, with emotionally, psychologically, in school, in a wide range of activities, as you mentioned. Were there any of the findings that were particularly surprising or encouraging to you about that?
I guess, just overall encouraged to hear, the stories of children who are really thriving, and it was really heartwarming, just some of the anecdotes that we heard from family members. So, for example, a mother, I think in Sweden, who talked about her young son and how he loves hip hop music. And one of his favorite things to do is to choreograph dances for his siblings. So I think, some of these stories to me really humanize this population, and also just illustrate how, kids are kids. And if you can take them out of these camp situations and put them with loving families, back into school, in a community where they can engage with other children and make friends, many of them can not only, adapt, but thrive. And I think that's one of the most important lessons.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to you and your team for that work. Beatrice, you also document a number of successful reintegration cases where the mother and child are doing well. What are the most important factors of success in those cases that you saw in the report?
Well, firstly, that they have been allowed to come out of the war-torn Syria and be able to come back to their home country. That's number one, of course. Then when it comes to the kids, it has actually turned out that despite the dire conditions and high-risk environments in Syria that the children have lived in, both like child psychologists and other professionals are surprised that children are in much better condition than perhaps was expected. And this indicates the mother's important function in protecting the children from various forms of threats in Syria. But also, despite the difficult circumstances there to have succeeded in helping the children to also develop. Upon their arrival in Sweden, I would say their possibility to live in safety and dignity with their family, a stable and predictable life situation for the kids to be able to begin school, to have access to nutritious food and positive social activities. These have been vital elements for the well-being of the children. This, along with the support from extended family and other key individuals in the children's lives, as well as professional social support and psychological rehabilitation for those in need of that, has provided the children protection and a stable foundation for recovery and reintegration. And I think it's important to always consider the children to be victims of this war. And a constant goal must be to shield returning children and their families from destructive or violent environments. Another lesson learned is that supporting the children means supporting their caregivers and other key persons, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and so on, who can be protective factors in the child's life, and also who will remain in the children's life long after the interventions from professionals have ended. Because for children who have been exposed to severe stress, the risk of future mental health problems can be reduced if the child's environment includes protective factors and the important adults in the child's everyday environment, and that they are allowed to be part of the reception and to create conditions for recovery through good care and support. Thank you.
That's very good. Joe, your report, the Human Rights Watch report, details how the mothers did what they could to protect and nurture their children in the camps. Have you found that continues in the country of nationality?
I have. Many of the mothers are really trying to figure out how to best support their kids. They're asking for, tutoring or summer school so their kids can, catch up in school. The other thing that I've really noticed is the commitment of extended family. I've spoken with a number of grandparents, uncles, and aunts of these children, especially, if the children have been orphaned or if the mothers are in detention. And it's really astonishing how committed they are to, securing the repatriation of their family members of these children, providing them with homes, providing them with care. I just got back from several days in Trinidad and Tobago, where there are between 55 and 70 children that are currently detained, and met a number of the family members there who are working hard for their return. And I know there are some even on this call today. And they are just so eager to have these children back so that they can really help them reintegrate. So it's important to think about not just the mothers, but also the extended family that's ready and willing to help.
Yeah, we've seen that at RTC as well. And I know in Bia's report, we mentioned that it's been really remarkable to see just the amount of people and adults that rally around these children as they're coming back to their country of nationality. Beatrice, similarly, what have you seen as factors for the mother's successful reintegration?
I followed the mothers closely. Among those brought home, it's 8 of them that I've been almost in weekly contact with. Now it's been almost 1.5 years since they have been back. And I see that needs vary a lot for individuals depending on what they have experienced and also the conditions of life where they are returning. Some mothers have been subjected to violence during their time in Syria. They have all lived in a war zone. Some of them have seen their children or spouses die. They have lived under the psychological stress of trying to survive day by day, fearing for their lives and for the lives of their children, including in the camps, and also with uncertainty for the future. So whilst the legal system has to look at these returnees through a perspective of investigation possible crimes for the adults, I think for reintegration purposes, we need to have the view on social work and support and interventions from authorities such as social services and such as healthcare agencies, As well as civil society organizations that can provide support, we must aim to empower the mother, enable her recovery and reintegration. And here we've seen that mental health and psychosocial support are key contributing factors. A multi-agency collaboration with relevant authorities and civil society organizations, including faith communities that have a contextual knowledge and understanding, could be one answer as well. Because when governmental and or like public sector agencies together with NGOs work together, they can successfully plan and implement a holistic reception to assess and meet the needs of the returning families, and also to prevent radicalization. So this would include helping the families access the support they need to improve their emotional, their psychological, their social and theological resilience. Because these families have lived, they've been, I mean, it's not only a terrorist group, they have also lived in a religious cult with a very twisted version of religion. So after exposure to the radical ideology of ISIS, some returnees may need help from faith-based organizations that can offer theological guidance for healthy understandings of identity and belonging. And this can also have an immunizing effect against discrimination, propaganda, and future radicalized recruitment. Today, all the returning mothers that are part of our study have started working or has gone back to school. They are in university and studying now. So that's very hopeful for the future for themselves and foremost for their children. Thank you.
Very hopeful indeed. Bridget, I've been eager to hear your perspective. I want to turn things over to you now. You've been working in these contexts of protection and children in armed conflict all over the world. So I'd love to hear your remarks on the situation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I very much appreciate it. UNICEF has been working around the world on this issue as a matter of priority, given the really dire situation that children are facing there. So thanks for that. And also really wanted to welcome, I know that the report has been out, the Human Rights Watch report has been out for a while, but I wanted to just emphasize, and I know you were echoing this, Beatrice, in your remarks, just how helpful it is to have a report about what happens on the other end, right? This report and what you're saying, Beatrice, talks about that whole repatriation to reintegration pathway, and having an understanding of how that works and how to address the issues on through that continuum, I think is really helpful. Because what we see time and again is really just a focus on the deprivation, and it's a severe deprivation, and so we understand why that's necessary. It creates the urgency. It really highlights the rights violations that are happening for children, but it's really important to understand that we can do something. We can address these issues. It's not an unsolvable problem. So all of that I just wanted to say, because I really think it's an important piece. And also just what you were saying about caregivers and what they can contribute actually inside Syria, the protecting their children in the camps, we haven't heard a discussion about that before. So that evidence also contributes to what we know. As you might know, UNICEF teams, they're present in Syria, we're present in hundreds, well, not hundreds, but more than 150 countries around the world. So we engage on this issue both inside Syria and also outside Syria. And as well, there was a number of children in Iraq that were in similar situation. And I also wanted to highlight the fact that actually the largest proportion of children in Northeast Syria that are foreign are Iraqi children. And many of them have been repatriated to Iraq. And I mean, it's not nearly fast enough or enough, but really we can learn a lot from that process as well. So our teams have been working in these, and while the process doesn't, it's not without its challenges, what you've spoken about today kind of confirms what we've learned through our work as well. So that is to say that once children arrive, we do see positive changes. They begin, as children begin to realize that they're in a safer place, right? As families begin to realize that they're in a safer place. Initially, it can be very scary, as Beatrice was mentioning. You're arrived to a whole new place, new food, new language, new people. traveling to a place that they've never been before. But after they interact in safe spaces and attend classes, engage in psychosocial support, and even then again, when they meet their families, we have seen the fear and that sort of isolation and withdrawal begin to fade. And so then they start that adjustment process. Now, this is also reflective of our experience in many other contexts. So this is a particular set of children in a particular place, but over the decades, children have been in situations of armed conflict around the world. In Uganda, in Colombia, in Sri Lanka, you name, in Somalia, in Iraq, I can go on. Unfortunately, we have a lot of conflict in this world. What we have learned from that process is that children can recover. This is not actually new. And this is what we try to, the messages that we try to convey to people is really, we have tools that can help and have helped. And we have learning from those contexts. Children who've lived under the control of very violent, very ideological groups, they've been used, abused, exploited, or just simply live in a family that's in an area under the control of that armed group. They can survive, they can adjust, they can contribute and heal. And so we focus on a lot of what you've said, which is to say multidisciplinary approach, age appropriate focus. So for younger children, for older children, for girls, for boys, they may need different things. And also this family and community focus, because successful reintegration requires community support. So a few of the things that we've noticed and we think are really important in terms of what needs to be done to prepare children is to have that advanced planning. Okay, so not only does it take everything to be in place that folks were just talking about, but in advanced planning of that, the documentation, right? Civil documentation, legal documentation needs to be in place, an understanding of children's needs and planning for their alternative care. You've heard what people were saying about the separation that might happen actually at the airport on arrival. The children need to be prepared for that, right? If it happens, because that can be as traumatic or distressing as something else. In fact, these caregivers are sometimes their main focus, right? Their main bond. So maintaining that family contact is really important. Preparing families and communities for return and providing holistic and confidential mental health and psychosocial support. So these activities and the support can't be used for intelligence gathering purposes, right? This is about therapeutic interventions for children. I just wanted to say one last thing just around the security issue, because I think it's a really important thing that comes up, right? We have to acknowledge that there are domestic political considerations in countries of return, and people are afraid of returnees for whatever reason, whether it's well-founded or not well-founded. And so we really do need to grapple with that issue and make sure that we really talk about how this contributes actually to positive security outcomes in the end, right? Children who can contribute to and women who can contribute to their communities make it a safer community, right? Isolation, withdrawal, stigmatization, all of those things actually don't contribute to good outcomes. Protection of human rights does. Protection of child rights does. And so while we understand and we don't want impunity for crimes, and we always say that, right? So there are people who are in these camps or in detention centers who may have committed crimes, and they do need to be held accountable, particularly from our point of view, crimes against children. However, they're not going to get accountability where they are, right? There is no functioning system there for that. So if that's what we want, that also is better done in countries of origin. So that's what I wanted to say, just my initial reflections, but happy to take any other questions on our view and our experience. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bridget. I have a question. Can you talk a little bit more about how the international community can prevent more children from becoming victims of armed conflict?
So that's a big question. I mean, obviously, stop war. That would be the ideal, right? But really, I think not to be flip about it, it is a really important question about how we better protect children. I think yes, obviously, greater peace and security starts with resolving conflicts without war, without violence across the board. In addition to that, however, we want to address the drivers of part of that is what is driving people perhaps to become associated if they do so on a voluntary basis. For children, as you know, from a child rights perspective, they get recruited if they're associated with an armed group, but kind of along a continuum of coercion. Many of them don't actually have any choice, or they're born into a situation. But often it's actually not ideology that drives people. It's actually economics, it's corruption, it's discrimination, it's inequality. So if we solve our development issues, if we address those, fighting over national resources, not people who don't have access to everything, or just straight up discrimination, if we can learn to address those, I think we will lower the temperature and lower the amount of conflict. When conflict is ongoing, one of the things that I think you've sort of echoed in what was said here around education, for example. So protection of education from disruption and attack. Education is amongst the most protective environments for children in most cases, right? So keeping children in school or with access to curriculum is also really protective. Giving support to parents in the midst of conflicts, right? If you're fleeing, actually displacement is one of the highest predictors of distress for children. Multiple displacement, and that insecurity and constant movement is also really, really challenging for children, and is one of the main things that causes distress, as well as obviously the violence that they experience in the middle of war.
Yeah, absolutely. Bridget, we've been focused tonight on children whose governments have repatriated them from the detention camps in Syria. Yet thousands of children remain there in the camps. What can you say to their situation in general and as it relates to the Convention on the Rights of the Child?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on the really horrible conditions there, just to say I think everybody knows a lot about those conditions. I will say that from the perspective of UNICEF, this is a child rights disaster. It is absolutely basically shameful that children are sitting in that situation. From a child rights perspective, children don't have access to any of the basic things that they need. That is food, shelter, adequate water, education, healthcare, those basic services, right? Many of them have experienced horrific violence. They've seen their parents killed in front of their eyes, siblings, they've been separated. They don't know, they don't have anything meaningful to do with their lives. So all of these, as you know, the Convention on the Rights of the Child has a panoply of rights inclusive of all of those things. Some children have, of course, been stuck there for years, and some of them are becoming older to the point where they will no longer have the protections of being a child. So the longer they stay there, the less they have access to those rights, right? And so if they are deprived of liberty, whether it's in a camp or in a detention center in Northeast Syria, they without any due process, without any recourse, it's something that we consider to be really a grave violation of their rights. I mean, not necessarily in the grave violation CAC agenda type of thing, but really among the most deprived children that we see in the world. Of course, there are many children in other situations of armed conflict that are suffering just as much. But really, our advocacy is around safe repatriation. There may be children who will not be able to return or may not, maybe their places of origin will never be found, or it won't be safe for them to be repatriated. And so there is also a real question for the international community about what we're going to do to support children who may remain behind. I think this is something that we can't forget about. And as well, of course, the thousands of Syrian children who are suffering, tens and hundreds of thousands of Syrian children as well.
Yeah, and I think I don't, from my perspective, I don't hear enough conversation around those children that might be left behind and how best to support them. So thank you for bringing that up. I want to leave a lot of time for questions from the audience, so I'm going to pause there. Bridget, Joe, and Beatrice, thank you all for your insightful and important information. So let's open it up now to the audience for questions. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand or drop it into the chat box, and we'll allow plenty of time. Any questions for any of our panelists? All right, well, while people are thinking, I wanted to touch back on something, Bridget, that you said in your opening remarks around the kind of how repatriation of foreign citizens contributes to better security in the region. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so a lot of times, and I think, Joe, you would probably have said this hundreds of times too, but there isn't really a dichotomy between security and protection of human rights, right? These are coextensive, necessary. So if we're going to have better peace and security, we have to protect individual rights, because if you don't, this is partly what creates grievance against states, grievance against government, against international community or other communities, right? Where there's a feeling of a lack of fairness. One of the things about human rights is if people, in the simple sort of jargon, is if people feel like they're treated fairly, they will be more content, right? If they're treated unfairly, whether it's economically, whether it's from a detention point of view, whether it's a process point of view, access to services, they don't feel that they are treated fairly, that creates grievance and perhaps more incentive for them to, fight the state. So if we're talking about a project, which is to say peace, then we need to create conditions that enable people to access their rights and access basic services and things that they need. We all want, and I think one of the things we learn from the reports is that we all want the same thing for our children and our families. We want our kids to go to school. We want to have a plate of food. We want to have clean water. We want to have a place to live that's safe. If we can do that better, we can contribute to better security for everybody. So repatriation helps with that, right? It, first of all, from the perspective of what's happening inside Syria, is it so-called decongests, you get people out, the pressure is lower, you get more people can access services because there are simply fewer people, right? But they also have a possibility to be treated fairly. And I talked a little bit about accountability, which I think is really important. There are people who have committed crimes, right? There are many people who have not. There are many people who are victims of the armed group. But those who have do and should be held accountable. I think that's helpful from a peace and security perspective as well, right? So people think that victims haven't been forgotten, that in fact victims feel like they've been treated fairly and they have a voice. If we leave people in a place where there is no justice, then there's no justice for victims either, right? So that contributes to better security and better positive outcomes for people, right? So there's a lot, and that can really only happen in places where there's a functional, recognized judicial system, which is not the case in Northeast Syria, which is controlled by a non-state armed group at this stage, right? De facto authority. So we can't get either humanitarian support or accountability in the current situation. Over.
And Joe, I think you wanted to follow up on that point as well, yes?
Yeah, just to reinforce this point that Bridget has made is that in this case, human rights and security issues are really one and the same. And, top counterterrorism and international security experts have called for the repatriation of all of the nationals from the camp, saying that this is in the best interests of everyone. And, they've pointed out the UN's top counterterrorism expert says that, unless we repatriate, we're going to end up with the very outcome that we're seeking to avoid, which is more violence and more radicalization. And so, one of the points that we've been making is that, in fact, the biggest risk is not bringing these children home. It's leaving them in the camps where they're exposed to continued violence and, ISIS loyalists continuing to recruit and radicalize. So, I think that's really important. And also, I saw in the chat, someone was asking, specifically about the large number of children from Syria and from Iraq. Bridget has noted that, a lot of children and other nationals from Iraq are being repatriated. I do want to flag that, Human Rights Watch has looked at the situation in Iraq, and we do have a lot of concerns about, children who have been accused of ISIS association being prosecuted and in very unfair trials, and often being sentenced based solely on coerced confessions, secured under torture. So we do, we, on the one hand, we really support Iraq's efforts to repatriate their nationals, but we are very concerned too about what might happen to the children, especially adolescents, once they're back in Iraq. So just to flag that. Thanks.
I see we have another question as well. Thanks, all my questions related to religious support to repatriated families. What kind of support is provided? And if there are any relevant programs in place, please share resources if available. Beatrice, I think you might have an answer for that one.
Well, in Sweden, with the official reception coordinated by authorities, this has not been part of their perspective in the very secular country of Sweden. However, there has been a need for religious guidance and religious rehabilitation for returnees. As a civil society organization, we have been able in Repatriate the Children to pick up on this, where we have during long period of time made connections with sheikhs, imams, religious leaders that have been helpful to connect to those returning women who has expressed such needs. And I think it's really important to be part of empowering a healthy religious identity for those who are still considering themselves to be religious and comes back to Sweden with the aftermath of living in a religious cult, where they have questions. Can I be a Muslim in Sweden? Is this Islam or was this ISIS? Like, some of them have not been educated religiously before they went there, and they need guidance to find who they can be in the religion without going to extremes. Thank you.
Mathilde, I see you have your hand up. You want to give us a question?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to bounce back on what Bridget was saying with regard to the justice and the accountability. So, for example, in France, for the first time last week on Wednesday and Friday, 2 women who came back, 2 French women, were sentenced respectively to 10 and 12 years. And it was highlighting really the complexity of those cases as well. With regard to proofs and what happened there, and it's really the collection of proof was really a challenge there. So but I was reading those cases with high interest. And then the second point, I wanted to bounce back on what Beatrice was saying at the beginning, and maybe you highlighted it. I joined with 5 minutes late, so maybe I really understand the case of family separation, Once they reach the tarmac, and in some countries there is, immediate family separation, and to whom Bridget said, the person that those children rely on the most, which is their mother, for their protection in the camps, and so I wanted to highlight another challenge, which is when those children are separated, quite often we see that they are placed in foster care in countries or in institution, and that can last for a long time while they do the background check on extended families. And I think this is really another problem, because then you end up having another separation afterwards, and those children are not placed in those foster care families. So I'm going to take again the example of France, not for 2 weeks, it's months length. So it's those months where children are going to get reattached to those families and again separated. So I think there is really something that has to be done there, which is, facilitate the background check on the families. We understand that, yes, they need to have background check, but there's something that, we harm again, the children are harmed again in this process. So yeah, that's just just a few points I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Beatrice, did you want to address that? Or Bridget, I see your hand is up as well.
Yeah, I just want to say that with the returning Swedish kids, there are examples where kids have been placed in seven different homes since they got to Sweden. And these are children that has been displaced multiple times during their upbringing in Syria. And then when they come to Sweden, for this not to be prepared, it's a major obstacle for reintegration. So the authorities can prevent a lot of suffering and create stability when they are more prepared, I think. Thank you.
Bridget, did you have a remark?
Yeah, I wanted to, I echo this call for, and perhaps in some cases in some countries it's a legal framework issue about what process needs to happen. But I've said before, and I'll say again, that it's a huge issue planning. If we know that there are children going to come home, or if country knows, they can start planning and do that work as soon as possible, and that's the best option, right? So that those plans can be well underway before the repatriation operation happens. But I wanted just to say something quickly about the religious, the question that was in the chat about religion. I just wanted to mention that, what we've found across contexts in terms of how children, this is for ideology generally, including religious ideology. The LRA, for example, was a major Christian ideology armed group, but similar issues, right? Ideology actually for children tends to be lower on the, it's not the main driver of child association, and it's also not necessarily the main source of distress. And so when children come home, really what's important is to really assess on a case-by-case basis what those child's needs are, what their strengths are, what to build on. So you don't have a cookie cutter approach. Not every child or woman for that matter will need the same exact intervention. And so what we have found is that looking at the individual needs of those people are really important to developing a case plan. And it might include some religious counseling, but it might actually not. We can't make that and in fact, it might be detrimental if you focus too much on the ideology to the detriment of some of the other needs that the child may have. Over.
Any other questions for our panel? This has been a great discussion. Did I hear somebody else? Potentially? No? Last call for questions. All right. Well, thank you very much for participating in this important conversation. And as we wrap up, Joe, Bridget, Beatrice, I want to give you all the last word. Any closing thoughts from you?
Yes. Who wants to begin? Joe, perhaps?
Just that, I hope that what people take away from this conversation is that many children are reintegrating very successfully in countries all over the world. And the children who are still in the camps, they can reintegrate too, if only given the chance. Thanks.
Yeah, and I want to say that The international community can contribute to prevent more children from being victims of ISIS and other armed groups and armed conflict. One critical step in this context is for foreign states to repatriate all their citizens, children, women, and men. And resourceful countries that repatriate their citizens must also consider to contribute to finding solutions for families of other citizenships that are being left behind, where the end goal must be to empty and close the camps and prisons as well in the nearby future. A very major issue is also to offer victims of this war support, protection, and redress. So I think what we need is a knowledge-based decision-making where humanitarian principles, rule of law, and global security are united. Thank you.
Thanks, Beatrice. Bridget, any final thoughts from you?
No, I echo exactly what they've said. I think we know what we have to do as an international community in terms of those children who can go home. They should go home. And then we need to start planning for those who may not. I think we don't live in a perfect world. So I sort of know that there will be children who will not be able to. And I think we need to start planning for them as well, because their rights are just as important and their future is as well. But thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you all for attending today's session. Fascinating conversation, and everyone in the audience can find links to the RTC report and the Human Rights Watch report on our Facebook and Twitter feeds. If you have any additional questions, you can contact us by emailing info@repatriatethechildren.org. That's info@repatriatethechildren.org, or find us on social media. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great day and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.